Welcome to Shakespeare the Whole Year, a series of research based, student friendly talks on various aspects of Shakespeare and his works, hosted by the Shakespeare Society of India East Zone under the aegis of SSI New Delhi. Lecture number 5, delivered by Dr. Anusha Bhaur, is titled Resolution, Acceptance and Forgiveness in Shakespearean Plays. Dr. Anusha Bhaur is at present Associate Professor in English and Dean of Postgraduate Studies, St. Paul's Cathedral Mission College.
Hello everyone. I would like to begin by thanking the Shakespeare Society of India East Zone for inviting me to give a video lecture for the Shakespeare the Whole Year series. I am rather honored and I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Secretary, Shakespeare Society of India East Zone, Dr. Diana De. So without further ado, I would begin my talk, which is titled Resolution, Acceptance and Forgiveness in Shakespeare's Plays. The main thrust in this lecture is to comment and also cite some instances from the repertoire of Shakespeare's plays in an effort to illustrate the presence of mainly forgiveness and with it the concomitant aspect of acceptance and how repeatedly these two aspects have led to the resolution of complications in many of his plays. While forgiveness or acceptance may not seem the best alternatives on all occasions of their presence, it seems Shakespeare's unique way of resolving all tensions. I would like to argue that these virtues sometimes take predominance over the assigned genres or patterns of classification of his plays. In my discussion, I shall refer to The Merchant of Venice, Measure for Measure, King Lear, The Winter's Tale, The Twelfth Night, and The Tempest. The plays not only typify several genres, but also roughly traverse the working life of the poet dramatist. One is not sure, however, of any biographical relevance or personal instances in Shakespeare's life for such attempts to gloss over differences, conflicts, or oppositions in an attempt to give primary relevance to such universal sentiments. These virtues in the plays often give a hint of an all-pervasive philosophy which is the fabric and tenor of wisdom. Shakespeare seems to be at work with the human condition since rather early in his career. Just as we know that he always worked with pre-existent source materials, we also know that his reworking of them is a creative amalgamation to create something unique and which, above all, underlines the human condition. Human sentiments, human characters, humans in crisis all appear to be fundamentally similar throughout the world. Great literature seems uniformly true for all cultures and civilizations, and Shakespeare's works would be among the first to be characterized in the same manner. We also know that Shakespeare's works have been appreciated and claimed not only for his own age, but are true and applicable for all ages to come. At the time when Shakespeare's plays were performed, he was a popular dramatist in the manner we would define and specify the term popular now. But beyond the local metaphors and the topical references, Even beyond the frames of his sources, Shakespeare has survived, not only in the English speaking world, but in other parts of the world, with cultures and languages of their own. This is certainly a result of the depth and analysis of the human situations in the play, which are universal and stand true beyond all parameters of hegemony or hierarchy. It is primarily the Shakespearean critics, the editors of his texts, who have specified certain patterns for the analysis of his plays. For instance, there is a received pattern in the way in which a comedy, more specifically a romantic comedy, should unfold, as well as there is also the well known tragic pattern, or even the question of his last plays or problem plays. A romantic comedy is most commonly a conflict between two generations, the younger, sprightlier, and in love, and the older, more censorious and in opposition. The action of these plays usually complicates themselves through several incidences, such that ultimately the lovers unite and there is a happy acceptance by all. But sometimes the sanctity of this pattern is not maintained, or even if finally achieved, there are ruptures in its journey and salient questions are evoked, which point more towards the lived realities of life and are far from the Arcadian society, which forms the general canvas of these plays. One sees such questions in both The Merchant of Venice and Measure for Measure. In the former play, Shylock the Jew helps Antonio by lending him 3,000 ducats and attains considerable importance in the plot of the play when Antonio's ships sink and the latter seems incapable of repaying the loan. Bassanio's newly wedded wife, Portia, takes up the cudgels by not only volunteering to pay the money, but also in secret, arriving as the lawyer in defense of Antonio. By a unique and thoroughly literal interpretation of the bond, Portia outwits Shylock's claim of Antonio's pound of flesh. There should not be a single drop of blood split in its taking. The tenets of the law cannot be shaken. It is their application which need to be original. In this case, it is the interpretation of the bond, even by the letter, its fidelity being not shaken, which takes Shylock and the court by surprise, and there is no scope for criticism anywhere. What we have, however, at the end of the fourth act of The Merchant of Venice is not only a happy resolution for Antonio's life, but a happier resolution for all the lovers, namely Graciano and Nerissa, Lorenzo and Jessica, in the fifth act and later in Belmont. But we leave Shylock a broken man, alone and forsaken, who must fend for his life in one way or another to survive. The play does not pause for him. He was originally meant to be a comic gull, but Shakespeare creates a more human figure of this Jew, who bleeds when pricked and must abide by the laws of wild justice when it comes to revenge. Shylock remains outside the pattern of Shakespeare's romantic comedy. When judged in the light of acute anti Semitism in a post Hitler world, it does seem that Shakespeare was being rather unkind to his Jew, even judging by the standards of anti Semitism of his own times. In a comic scenario, Shylock becomes a tragic figure who must suffer for his own hubris and error of judgment. One leaves the play with a feeling of disquiet for Shylock. What is to become of him? Measure for Measure is yet another play that is exclusively based on the implementation of law. But it is also a play with a deeply problematic theme, the execution of law and its consequent meting out of justice. Who is capable of this mighty office? The play's action is pivoted on the apparently flimsy tropes of disguise and mistaken identity. The Duke of Vienna acknowledges his laxity in acting and appoints a deputy, Angelo, who would act his part. Angelo is seemingly a stricter arbitrator of law and is considered to be honest. The play tackles on serious circumstances under the pattern of a comedy, and very often it veers close to the territory of moral ethics in the implementation of justice and fair play. Angelo surprises, even strikingly, himself when he wakes up to lust and desire after being accosted by Isabella, who pleads for her brother's life. Being an occupant of the seat of law, he feels privileged to disobey the very principles he upholds. Isabella is compelled to bait upon her virtue and needs to compromise her virginity to buy her brother's life. Angelo labels it as charity, while Isabella considers it as blasphemy, given the fact that she is soon to be ordained as a nun. The actual Duke, however, comes to her rescue and she accepts the proposition under the disguised trope of the substituted bedfellow and the rather fortuitous presence of Mariana, who had been aggrieved by Angelo in the past. Shakespeare has enormous talent for resolving differences, but the climax of the play is reached when news arrives of Claudio's execution. Isabella, almost mad for retribution, loudly proclaims Angelo's lustful demeanor, and the complex plot untangles, ultimately resulting in the union of Claudio and Juliet, and also with a surprising proposal of marriage for Isabella from the Duke himself. One wonders why Isabella needs to be compromising to a secular life when she already sees herself as a dedicated nun. In an ironical twist, the denouement makes it clear that Angelo is guilty of the same offense as Claudio and must lose his life too if Viennese law is to be put into strict action. But at this juncture, Isabella pleads for Angelo's life and the former is finally pardoned. It is this preference of the unreasonable and the unexpected over the reasonable and the predicted that is to be observed and remarked upon. Shakespeare prefers to grant Angelo the pardon, provided he promises happiness to Mariana. While the play conforms to the overall pattern of a romantic comedy, it also leaves us enough scope for the unpredictability of human nature. Now moving on to the tragedies, tragic pattern. Shakespeare's tragic pattern usually makes place for a multifaceted genius as a tragic protagonist whose internal flaw combines with external circumstances to become the tragic flaw. While this is easily applicable in the case of Macbeth, Hamlet, and Othello, it is not so true for King Lear. The latter is a senile man of fourscore years and more, who must divide his kingdom amongst his daughters through a love test. Goneril and Regan have so much love that Cordelia wonders why they might have married and set up individual homes. She herself cannot bring to confess her love in an open platform and replies with an austere nothing when interrogated by Lear as to the extent of affections. An incest and choleric Lear immediately blurts out, "Nothing will come out of nothing." Lear, however, will soon rue his own preferences, as Goneril and Regan would oust their father after receiving their shares of the kingdom. The daughter who was his most beloved was banished by the choleric and arrogant father. But Lear's experiences out in the open and barren heaths of England gradually ennobles him. His fool, who is believed to be his alter ego, almost catechizes him into the school of humanity. The moment when he realizes that man is nothing but an unaccommodated being and merely a two-pronged, forked animal, he ceases to be a king and becomes at one with humanity. He is redeemed and, in an unexpected gesture, begs forgiveness from his daughter Cordelia. Even when one is completely exhausted with the range of emotions in Lear, one is confronted with the moment of Cordelia's death. Lear graduates into the realm of meta-tragedy, going beyond the ends of tragedy into sheer bewilderment of human catastrophe. With King Lear, Shakespeare perhaps begins his trajectory into the realms of feminine grace and maternal charms, leading into more complex and evocating themes of redemption and even regeneration. One might, in this connection, think of The Winter's Tale and The Tempest, where both Perdita and Miranda are key figures. Before turning my attention to either of these plays, it is necessary that I delve into a brief discussion of Twelfth Night. The play, as is designated, is a romantic comedy, but being true to the festivities after Christmas, the title has a slight ring of sadness as well, as it marks the end of festivities. The note of melancholy in the play is accentuated not only by Feste, but also by Viola, who must accommodate in a foreign location and even jeopardize her own identity as a woman. One might also speak of the unreasonable and pretended melancholy of Olivia, as well as that of Malvolio, the gull of the comic festivities. Out of the spirit of the carnivalesque, one wonders at the seriousness of a real shipwreck, which has thrown the occupants of the vessel any which way, with no certainties of the future. In this respect, Twelfth Night is faced with more critical situations than The Tempest. We must remember that while the storm in The Tempest was a result of magic and supernatural machinery, the shipwreck in Twelfth Night was the result of a natural catastrophe. Yet in both plays, it is the sea which divides as well as unites the characters. We must also remember that in the former play, the characters, especially Viola, Orsino, and Olivia, seem to be stuck in an insoluble problem, which, as Viola says, to time must be left. Yet, as Shakespeare would have it, Sebastian, Viola's twin brother, must most gratuitously solve by presenting himself. Hence, in a chance-bound world where twins get lost, they also find themselves, and although most suddenly, find the correct mate for Olivia, who had fallen in love with the self of Cesario Viola. Sebastian also finds happiness for Viola, as she is now free to woo Orsino, her lord, in her own capacity as a woman and not as a page boy. Hence, once again, there is happiness for the lovers in the middle of the festivities, and Feste must find happiness either in his old world, in his old household, or live by his tabor and music. Both The Tempest and The Winter's Tale have been classified as the romances. They are also among Shakespeare's last plays. In either play, we have more improbabilities than the other plays of Shakespeare. In The Winter's Tale, we have a rather toxic situation where Leontes suspects his queen Hermione's loyalty and fidelity. Their child Perdita is abandoned while their son Mamilius dies. The situation at this point is anything but harmonious. Yet, by some happy chance, Perdita survives and grows into a beautiful maiden of 16 years. In a more improbable suspension of disbelief, Hermione, once considered dead, suddenly makes a reappearance alive after 16 long years. In a characteristic old wives' tale of A Winter's Tale, the play glosses over the unities only to offer verdurous charms in the form of Perdita, who is almost a personification of Proserpina or Spring herself. There is regeneration, redemption, regeneration and redemption all over, and the charm of Arcadian bliss once again wins us and everyone else in the play. The Tempest begins at a point when the destruction is almost complete in the life of Prospero. The former Duke of Milan has lost his state to a conspiring brother in alliance with the King of Naples due to his own negligency of princely duties. He was more preoccupied with his own studies rather than looking after his dukedom. He was left to seek out his own destiny with a child, along with only a trunk of his books. Deep out, he was just left by himself. The first act of the play is a metaphor for the many storms in the life of Prospero, and the storm that we see right at the beginning reflects the storms he actually withstood. In the same act, he recounts his past life to Miranda, his daughter, now a young woman. The tempest with which the play begins is a fabrication, but it achieves the purpose of bringing those characters on shore who have played such significant roles in Prospero's life. The course of the play sees that Prospero uses Ariel to separate, confuse, and divert those who sinned against him. For example, the King of Naples, Alonso, his own brother Antonio, and Alonso's brother Sebastian. He carefully separates Ferdinand from the group, Ferdinand being Alonso's son, and allows him to meet and befriend Miranda. In a one of a kind love at first sight occasion, Miranda and Ferdinand pledge each to the other, much to Prospero's delight. What is significant to note here is that Shakespeare intends Prospero to aim for a new beginning, a regenerative step to wield against the previous losses. Now, this is something that we are talking about. What is the raison d'etre of holding on to previous losses, of previous devastation, of even previous tragedy? What should we look forward to? How should we welcome the future? When the others, namely Alonso, Sebastian, and Antonio, are brought forward, and Alonso realizes that his son Ferdinand is alive, after all, he is too overwhelmed to remember his past involvement in Prospero's doom. He had thought he had lost his only son and heir to the kingdom. Instead, he is repentant and is more obliged to welcome Miranda as his daughter. He consents to the match between Ferdinand and Miranda. Prospero too is open to a new relationship. The conspirators, Antonio and Sebastian, are punished for their continued plots against Milan and Naples. The intervening time, the passage of time, one understands, prepares Prospero for forgiveness on the one hand and allows for new life on the other. The same may be said to be true for Perdita and Hermione. The intervening time has allowed for forgiveness and a promise for a new beginning. We began with a question for Shylock. Looking at the trajectory of Shakespeare's plays takes, one might have perhaps done with some more kindness than leaving him in complete darkness. But again, it is time that has caused the dramatist to mellow down. Shakespeare, in many ways, offers the closest solution to the manner in which life is lived and survival ensured. For him, it seems life and its going meant more, and unveiling a more natural world beyond the romantic, the tragic, or the historical was of utmost importance. Again, we must do Dr. Samuel Johnson the credit when he said that Shakespeare's plays unveiled the real state of sublunary nature beyond all classifications, whether it is comedy, tragedy, or problem.